Hey folks, I'm Mark Ryan. This is Super Review, and this is the Letshuoer D13. This is the latest IEM from the artist formerly known as Shure. And to be honest, this brand wasn't super on my radar before about a year ago. So they had some IEMs come out before. I heard some of them. I wasn't super in love with them. But then they released the Letshuoer S12, the planar magnetic IEM that by now you probably are well aware of, and that is decidedly a very decent IEM. And then I later heard the Letshuoer EJ07M, awful name, but also a very, very decent IEM, more than decent IEM for sure. And then I got my hands on and reviewed the Kinda Lava, which has turned out to be one of my favorite IEMs. And now I'm definitely very interested in anything that Letshuoer is going to do. And the D13 that we've got here is the latest of the bunch. So what this is a single dynamic driver earphone. It comes in at around 120 bucks. So you can kind of start to pinpoint this in the space in the market. And really, I was just kind of interested to try this thing out, see how it compares to some of the competitors that you're probably thinking of, right? Moondrop, Starfield, Fiio FH3, and for the past couple of weeks, multiple weeks, honestly, I've been listening with the D13 and comparing it with those other IEMs so that I can come here and let you know what I think. And I guess that's ostensibly what we're here for. Like all my other reviews though, this is a live stream. If you're here now watching live, you have any questions about the D13 or anything else we talk about, please leave your questions in the live chat and I'm going to ignore you for a little bit, but at the end of the review, we will have a back and forth conversation in real time. Otherwise, I guess a shout out to Letshuoer for sending this in for review. I do have links to where you can find this in the description down below. But with that said, without further ado, let's dive to the table and start talking about, well, we'll start talking about the physical stuff. We'll talk about the build, what comes inside the box, and then we'll talk about the sound. And for starters, here's the packaging. Here's the box. I think is very classy, tasteful packaging. Interesting, I didn't actually notice this until I was setting up the table. They've got high-res audio certification, that's kind of rare in the IEM space. Not that I don't think you should let that mean anything to you, but it's interesting that they got that certification. I'll say that, okay? And what you get inside the box is about what you would expect for a $120 IEM. You get this little carry case, which on their website, they describe this as a decent carry case. And I think it is absolutely a decent carry case. It's got a hard cover on the sides, and it's a little bit larger than some others, but still very, very pocketable. You can see it unzips. You've got plenty of room for your IEMs. Bada bing, bada boom. I'd say this is about as good as a case can get, although when it comes to closures, a zipper versus a magnet, I slightly prefer a magnet, but we're getting picky. Otherwise, they do include two different sets of ear tips, and I'll pull in samples of each one here. To be honest, I did not experiment with these. I didn't really see the reason why they included the two of them. They are slightly different shapes and sizes, so it's possible that, they might change the fit with your particular ear slightly. The opening on these is also slightly different. It looks like these ones are a little bit more open, but I don't know. It didn't seem like a big enough difference that I would expect it to make a difference in terms of the tuning. But they do give you those sets. Again, I think good for determining your fit. And then the other thing that they included is this, which is probably not obvious what these are, but we'll talk about these in a little bit. These are actually tuning filters. So these are alternative nozzles that screw on and off of the tips of the IEMs and ostensibly will change the frequency response. Again, we'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about the sound. But other than that, you get, of course, the IEMs themselves. And let's lay this out while I start to gush about this cable. I freaking love this cable. And I might not look like it's much. In fact, let me punch in on it so you can take a look. It's pretty simple. It's just got like this nice deep copper color. It's got a braided style. You've probably seen a lot of cables that look kind of like this. But what I really like about this cable are a couple things. So one, it's braided, but it's still actually very thin. Very thin and lightweight, which I appreciate. A lot of the times you'll get a braided cable and it just adds to the bulk. This one I feel is like just about the perfect weight for IEMs for me. You've got small hardware on it, which I appreciate, right? You got a small 3.5 millimeter connector, and it does also come in a 4.4 if that's your preference. And then you've also got a small Y split, and you've got a small and very functional chin slider that stays in place. So I appreciate all that. And then of course the behavior on this cable is outstanding. It's excellent. It is everything that I want in a cable. I'll give it the roadie wrap so you can take a look at just how well behaved and tidy this thing gets. But yeah, generally just very, very happy with this cable. I know, I don't know, somewhat for some people, cable doesn't matter that much. I'm not going to say this is an outstanding cable for the sound, because I don't think that cables make a big difference in the sound. But when it comes to the behavior and aesthetics and just how I like a cable to be, this is amongst my favorite cables, no joke. And this is on a $120 IM, so that's pretty nice. Of course, you've got your preformed ear hooks up here, and then it is also, of course, a removable cable in case you wanted to replace it. They're very stiff connectors, but they are 2-pin connectors, as you can see there. And that's going to bring us up to talking about the earpieces themselves, which I guess I won't zoom out. We can stay talking about these things. And what I will say about these things. All right, let's see. They are a nice metal shell, so they feel well built. I'll give them the clink test so you can validate that. And it doesn't come in various colors. I think it comes in like a blue and a red. I've got here, I don't know, kind of like this gunmetal color. Personally, I think this is the most attractive of the bunch, but that's going to be up to personal preference. What I do really like about this earpiece, though, is it's pretty small, and I'll show you as it fits in my ear in a little bit that it is indeed quite compact. In fact, I mentioned this is a dynamic driver earphone. I don't know if I mentioned the size of it. It's a 13mm dynamic driver, which is actually a little bit on the large side. And it's interesting that they were able to package it in this, well, package that is scarcely larger than the driver itself. So I think that's pretty cool. I guess I'll pop off the ear tips. You can take a look at the nozzle length on it. I think it has a suitable nozzle length. It's not overly long, but also not overly short. And then just to show you the filter tuning style, you just unscrew that and screw it back in to experiment with the different nozzles. Apart from that, I mean, look, the aesthetics, that's going to be up to personal preference. Of course, fit's going to depend on your personal ear, but I'll talk about how it fits in my ear. Generally, it fits pretty good. I mean, I mentioned it's a quite small IM. You can take a look at what that looks like inside my ear. Very small. It's got all rounded edges, so I don't feel anything inside my ear. I would say comfort, ingress, egress, all great on this IM. Fit security is decent, okay? Like a lot of IMs like this, let's see if I can pull this up. It's basically just the ear tip that is interfacing with my ear canal, and that creates all of the fit security, which is to say it's not a lot of fit security, right? It doesn't have, you know, parts of the IM that fit into these folds of my ear and stuff like that, which can make this maybe a little bit more universal of a fit. It'll fit more ears versus just fitting my ear exactly. But in terms of fit security, I would say it's about so-so. Fairly typical for a dynamic driver, but there you go. But yeah, generally I am pretty happy with the build, the aesthetic, and the comfort on this set. And one other thing, I don't know, this is a small minor thing worth mentioning, I suppose, is that the shells are actually quite magnetic. Let's see if I can, here I'm lifting one IM by the other because of that magnetic pull, which is, I don't know, it doesn't mean anything for the sound, at least not to me, but I suppose it's interesting. That said, I didn't really have any concerns with the shells smashing against each other or anything and chipping. Generally, yeah, pretty happy with the build and the physical stuff here. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and zoom in and start talking about the sound here on the Letshuoer D13. And like I typically do, we'll just start by describing the sound signature, and then I'll go into the details about what I like and maybe what I not like about the sound here. So, sound signature on the Letshuoer D13. Basically what we've got here is the V-shaped sound signature, which is to say that it's got some bass emphasis, it's got some decent bass emphasis to it, and then it's also got some contrast that comes from the top end. The mid-range is definitely not the focus of this sound signature, although it's, you know, I would say as a V-shaped sound signature goes, this is actually a pretty tasteful one. The bass curve I would describe as kind of a tasteful bass curve. It does still have some mid-bass meat to it, as you would expect of a V-shaped sound signature, but the sub-bass is elevated above the mid-bass, so it's not quite as bloaty as some other traditional V-shaped sound signatures for sure. That said, I would say this is actually a little bit on the aggressive side in terms of its tuning. The treble emphasis that you get on here is more so in sort of the lower treble and even the upper mid-range. And then as far as these tuning filters, what these do is they actually mildly increase the lower, some people will call it lower treble, I should say, the upper mid-range by about 2 dB, about 2 decibels, which, to be honest, is not a lot. In back-to-back comparisons, I would say that the tuning difference was not like super obvious, but I did find that the gold filters, which are the filters that increase the upper mid-range by a little bit, just added a little bit of extra contrast, a little bit of extra spiciness, and kind of lean this a little bit more into the sound signature that it's going for. My personal preference was, I don't know, it was basically a wash. Again, the difference between the filters is pretty minor. If you want to take a look at it for yourself, I do have them measured on squig.link, linked in the description down below. But I don't know, that's the basic gist here of the sound signature. So what do I like about the sound here on the D13? I mean, up front, a V-shaped sound signature is not my preference. By now, you know that, right? But I do think that this is actually a pretty well done V-shaped sound signature. It avoids the mid-bassy bloat of your traditional V-shape. You know, think of something like the Fiio FH3, to me is a more traditional V-shape that's just got more of a boxy sound from that mid-bass. This, I think the bass curve on this is a lot tidier. And honestly, the bass on this set is, in my opinion, the reason that you should be interested in this set. The bass is definitely the reason to look at the D13, okay? It was interestingly though, I will say this was pitched to me initially as a Bassheads IM. And I think if you look at the frequency response and even in listening experience, this doesn't sound like a super bassy set. Like this is not like an underwater super bass head set, like something, I don't know, Campfire Dorado. That's a bass head that's gone wrong type of set. The bass on this is actually pretty good. It's not so much a bass heads set in terms of quantity of bass, but I think the quality of the bass is actually pretty standout at the price range. It's got above average physicality. I think you get a nice authoritative sense of impact to it, and you get a pretty good definition on the attack as well, which is a thing that you can't say honestly for a lot of dynamic drivers, you know, under $150. I think that the bass on this also digs nice and deep into the sub-bass frequencies. Again, if your music calls for it, it does a really good job there, to be honest. And the physicality of this, while tonally and on the graph, like I mentioned, it doesn't seem like it's a ton of bass. The physicality of it definitely adds to the sensation and the perception of the bass. And so I do think that it does make it sound a little bit bassier than it graphs. And again, honestly, I really do think that the bass is the best part of the sound here on the D13, and arguably I would say this is actually a very good bass. And I don't know, I guess, let's see, any other notes to say on the what I like bit? I mean, it has actually a pretty decent sense of resolution if you're comparing this with sets that, you know, cost $50. So you're coming up from around $50 sets, you will notice a decent resolution bump here on the D13. But what do I not like about the sound here on the D13? There are some things. The tuning, like I mentioned, V-shaped sound signature, not my preference. And that just because, you know, I tend to prefer a mid-range vocal focused sound signature, and the D13 really just is not that. On top of that, I would say that the D13 is a little bit on the sibilant side. I wouldn't say it's like overly sibilant, and in fact, on a lot of tracks, a lot of my sibilance tracks, it actually did decently well with it. But there were some tracks, the Parcels live album is a good example, where this was, you know, definitely less than smooth, a little bit edgy and a little bit sharp, and a little uncomfortable there in the treble. Also worth talking about the treble in this set is it does, sorry, I didn't mean to hit you there. The treble does roll off a little bit on the top end. You know, interestingly, it does actually give you a pretty decent sense of treble timbre. So like the high frequency percussion generally comes across pretty well, but it just doesn't extend well into the air. So then that contributes, I think, to just kind of a reduced sense of micro contrast that even plays into like the mid-range. Just that sense of detail and texture that could come from the mid-range. I think because of the treble roll-off, you really don't get that. And maybe also related, I would say that this has somewhat narrow staging. Again, I think soundstage on IMs and headphones, honestly, for the most part is not that notable. This, I would say, is somewhat on the narrow side, but for the most part, not that notable. So that would about do it for my thoughts here on the D13, but I do have to put this thing in context. So let me clear the table bring in a couple of competitors so we can talk about how the D13 stacks up to some of my favorite IMs at around this price range. I should put you back in your Rhodey wrapped form for this comparison. But what we've got here, of course, the Letshuoer D13, which we just talked about, single dynamic driver set, 120 bucks. Here we've got the Moondrop Starfield. Should be no stranger to pretty much everyone here on that's watching. Also a single dynamic driver set, and the price on this comes in at around 110 bucks. So a little bit cheaper, but I don't know, basically the same price. And then finally we've got here the Fiio FH3. This one's different. This is a hybrid set. It's got 2 balanced armatures and 1 dynamic driver. And the price on this is actually a little bit higher than the rest. It's 130 bucks, but again, I think if you're shopping for an IM at around this price range, you should be, in my opinion, considering all 3 of these. And let's start in the comparisons by just talking about how they are different in terms of the tuning, and then we'll talk about the technical stuff and the form factor later. But just in terms of the sound signature, okay? The D13, again, we just got done talking about this. This is a V-shaped sound signature. You've got a contrasty sound. You've got a bass-oriented sound signature, but it's really not overpowering on the bass. I think the bass on this is actually really tastefully done. It just overall comes across a little bit on the aggressive side. The Moondrop Starfield, in contrast, is actually a little bit less contrasty. I would say it's a mild V-shaped sound signature. So it still does have some bass emphasis to it, but it's not as much. And then I think the upper mid, or sort of like the treble region specifically, lower treble, is not as aggressive here on the Starfield. And so that just gives you, I think, a more balanced sound signature that's a little bit more laid back. I would say that the mid bass on here is maybe a little bit more bloomy than it is on the D13, which is an interesting difference, but there you go. And then the Fiio FH3, I would say of the bunch is the most mid-range focus. I would say this is basically neutral with sub-bass boost. It's got a nice mid-range focus tuning. The treble is not overly aggressive, but also not overly soft. And then the bass on this is really sub-bass focused, but also you get a surprisingly decent amount of that mid-bass punch from it, which I guess will lead us into talking about the techs. But before we start talking about the technical stuff, I should rank these in terms of my preference and tonality, and I would say that the FH3 is my favorite, just in the tuning. The Starfield would be next, and then the D13 would be not too far behind the Starfield, but I would say a bit behind the Starfield in terms of tuning for my preferences. Maybe a little bit more aggressive and, again, less mid-range focused than that. All right, so let's talk about these things in terms of technical aspects. Again, the D13, really the standout feature here is that clean, tight bass with a really nice sense of impact. You do get somewhat narrow sense of imaging, and there is, I think, a lack of micro contrast throughout the mid-range, but really the sound signature in general is nice and clean, and you get that bass without the sacrifice of it becoming bloomy and muddy or anything like that. So again, if you're looking for the bass king of the bunch, I would definitely say it's the D13. The Starfield, in contrast, I would say the bass here is actually a little bit on the woolly side. The attack on it is really just not nearly as tight and punchy as it is here on the D13. But I do think what you get out of the Starfield is you get a better sense of depth, kind of that front to back depth. Where again, the D13 sounds a little bit narrow, slightly boxed in. You do get, I think, a wider stage here out of the Starfield, and I think that comes from just a better sense of air in the upper treble. Whereas here with the Fiio FH3, I would say my biggest critique of this would be that the treble can come across a little bit plasticky sounding. But apart from that, really, I'm actually pretty impressed with the technical performance on this set. And every time I do a review where I have to bring this up for comparisons, I'm always kind of like surprised again that a $130 set is this good, because you get a nice wide stereo image. I think you get the best sense of definition and separation in instruments. I also think, as good as the bass is on this set, this bass is also maybe better. It's different. The bass on this is less mid-bass focused, so I think you do get more of that attack and punch out of the D13, but the sub-bass on the FH3 is really just quite sublime. Some of my favorite sub-bass, honestly, in really any IM. So really pretty impressive there. So yeah, in terms of technical performance, honestly, I would say the FH3 is a bit of a step up above, while these two, I would say, are about on par. So again, I think the Starfield is a little bit of an edge in terms of the micro contrast in the mid-range and that a little bit wider stereo image, whereas the D13 definitely has the edge in the bass quality at the sacrifice of the other things that the Starfield does a little bit better. And then finally, let's talk about how they compare in terms of form factor, again, to my preferences. The D13, you know, it's simple, it's utilitarian. We'll punch on this as we're talking about it. Simple, utilitarian, not, I don't know, it's not super styled, but I really like the physical aspects of this set. Again, it's nice and small. Fit security, I would say, is so-so, but honestly, that's true of all of these. And then the standout thing here too is this cable, which maybe you don't love this cable as much as I do, but I really do love the cable here on the D13. The Starfield, aesthetically, I gotta be honest, I never loved the aesthetic on this set. I mean, I like the color, the blue, but I really don't like the print here, like the Starfield, and then even over here on the other side, you got this weird compass design. I don't know, it feels old and dated, and maybe that's because this IM is a little bit old and dated, but I never loved the aesthetic on it. That said, the shells, the build quality are certainly nice. They are all metal like the D13, and fit security, I would say, it's about the same as the D13, to be honest. It's a single dynamic driver. Fit security is not the best, but it's not awful here on the Starfield. And then the Starfield cable too, I actually have grown to like it more than I did initially. Pretty decent cable, although I don't think it's on par with the D13's cable. And then the FH3 here, build quality, again, quite nice. Again, this is a hybrid unit, so it is a little bit different in build, in that you can see the inside is actually a little bit molded to the shape of an ear. That said, surprisingly, I would say fit security on this is not really any better. It did get better with the Moondrop spring tips that I put on here, but those don't come in the box, so these would also improve fit stability with spring tips. And then the cable that this comes with is actually not this cable, just as a heads up. This is a cable from a JVC FDX1. I really like this cable. I really like the IM, so I put the cable on the IM. The stock cable is a decent cable, but was not my favorite in terms of behavior. So in terms of just the purely the form factor, I would say I would rank them kind of like this. I think the D13 is probably my favorite overall. The FH3 would be next, because I think aesthetically it's pretty handsome, and then the Starfield would be my least favorite in terms of form factor. But I think that is going to do it for my review here of the Letshuoer D13. So what we're looking at, again, a V-shaped sound signature, not my favorite, but the bass quality on this thing is actually pretty standout. So if you're looking for, you know, a bass-oriented tune, not a bad pick, but out of 5 stars, personally, I'm going to go ahead and give it a solid 3 stars. To be honest, I was on the fence with this one. I could have given this one 4 stars, but honestly, like, I think it's probably not a set I will personally be going back to too much, except for when I need a bass reference for around 120 bucks. And if that's what you're looking for, certainly worth checking out. And the form factor in this set, I'm also pretty happy with. So that is the Letshuoer D13. Like I mentioned, if you're interested in checking out, I do have the links in the description down below. And while you're down there fishing around for those affiliate links, hit the like button if you like this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, ding the YouTube bell. And I'm also going to say, if you haven't already, check out my Discord server, which I've also got linked in the description down below. I'm there way too much, and we've got some good folks there having chat about audio like we're about to have here in the live stream. But if you're not here live, I'll catch you on the next live stream, or I'll catch you on Discord. And if you are here live, hang out. Let's have a little bit of a conversation before I call this kind of a quick one this evening.